Please join me in welcoming tonight's presenter, Russ Henry. As the
Well,
president, hi
sorry.
Russ. As the president of Minnehaha Falls Landscape, Giving Tree Gardens, and the founder of Bee Safe Minneapolis, Russ Henry has been protecting and growing ecosystems across Minnesota for decades. Together, his landscaping and gardening companies install, manage, and restore hundreds of properties throughout the Twin Cities with native pollinator plants and without the use of pesticides or synthetic fertilizers. Take it away, Russ.
Hi, thank you so much, Deborah. Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with everyone and with the Minnesota State Horticultural Society again tonight for this webinar. I'm very excited about this webinar, Bee Lawns and Beyond. My company, Minnehaha Falls Landscaping, we do a lot of bee lawn installations. I'm going to hit my video and turn that on. We do a lot of bee lawn installations, and we help folks transition their lawns and gardens over to bee friendly all year long. It's really kind of the heart and soul of our business, and the majority of our work is transitioning spaces to pollinator friendly, both lawns and gardens. So let's see, before we kick off tonight, I do want to offer one little scientific tidbit here. Why is it that bees hum? Well, it's because they don't know the words. Okay, well, seriously though, folks, we are here to talk about bee lawns, and bee lawns help us to savor and cultivate this deliciously interconnected planet. So we're going to talk tonight about the interconnections that we can see in our own lawns and gardens between bees and soil, climate, water quality, all the different things all the different benefits that can come along when we start growing bee lawns at home. So in order to do that, we're going to move through these 4 topics. We've got why to bee lawn first, and then what is a bee lawn. After that, we'll explore how to bee lawn, and then we're going to go beyond bee lawns. Very exciting. Okay, to be or not to be. Why to bee lawn? Let's explore this. Well, there are many benefits of bee lawns. First, I think of the aesthetic benefits. Then, of course, there's the low maintenance of a bee lawn. And then there's the habitat benefits. Let's jump into those. The aesthetic, for instance, I believe is the aesthetic of the bee lawn is the new aesthetic of the landscape. We are all looking for health and healing. And when we start to broadcast and advertise that this is a space of health and healing right there in our front lawn, well, that does start to turn heads. And I know that a bee lawn, and we're going to explore this, it's not your grandpa's lawn. It's a different lawn, and it looks different, and it behaves differently, and it has a different aesthetic value that includes flowers. I'll never forget meeting a gentleman who had just moved to the United States, and he asked me upon finding out that I'm a landscaper, how come some of the lawns are so pretty and they're filled with flowers and some of them are just green? And that question of his gave me pause and made me realize that our general aesthetic for lawns is one of a monocrop that is less representative of health and more representative of control and domination. Domination of the landscape, control. There's nothing that can possibly go wrong in a standard lawn when it looks so much like a golf course. However, I think as we'll explore, there is so much that can go wrong in a lawn that is kind of a standard issue lawn. So let's think about the aesthetic of bee lawns, that having blooms in the lawn is actually that new aesthetic of health. It's health and it's beauty, and it's quite charming. Also, a bee lawn does demonstrate that you have some economic intelligence, that you're not willing to just waste money on lawn care practices, and that you love spending time with your family, and that you value ecosystem health. Now, I do a lot of landscape consultations every year. I do about 300 consultations at different sites, mostly homeowners that I'm visiting at their home landscape. And 300 out of 300 people need to talk to me about needing a low maintenance lawn. That's everybody brings up low maintenance, and I get it. We have better things to do with our time. Lawns in general, the way that we manage lawns currently with Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass, these are very high maintenance grasses, very high maintenance turf lawn, turf options. And as such, Kentucky bluegrass needs watering, it needs fertilizer. Weeds are much stronger than it, so it will be overrun with weeds easily, and then requires either massive amounts of hand weeding or a lot of herbicides and other poisons. The great thing about a bee lawn is we cut all that out. There's no irrigation, there's no pesticides, there's no fertilizers, and there's no mowing if you want to. There's certainly options for reduced mowing. Mowing is something that we're going to talk about here. So get your weekends back, go for a bee lawn, and enjoy that low maintenance lifestyle. Okay, now let's see. Habitat. Of course, we know that bees need blooms. There is a wonderful researcher in the Twin Cities and big bee lawn advocate named James Wolfen. And he, when he was at the U of M, did a study in Minneapolis parks. And in that study, he studied the bee lawn seed mix, white clover, creeping thyme, and self-heal. And he found 55 species of wild bees foraging on the white clover. And in the parks where they had the additional 2 species of creeping thyme and self-heal, they found another 10 species of bees. So 65 different species of bees supported by the bee lawn. And then they found that, they did also mention that their study being restricted in geographical area meant that there was likely to be many more species of bees feeding on these 3 species of blooming plants outside of the Minneapolis parks and where there may be more species of bees in general. And so James Wolfen is a employee of the Twin Cities Seed Company, and that's where I get my bee lawn seed mixes from. That's where I get all my seeds from. Twin City Seed is, I'll just say, they're probably the highest quality vendor of seed in the state. They don't pay me to say that. Let's see now, the importance of bees. Let's go into this really quick here because we know bees are super important for pollination. 1 in 3 bites of food we eat are pollinated by bees. So that's our fruits and our nuts and our vegetables, feed for livestock, including alfalfa and clover, pollinated by bees. So the world and the supermarket, the kitchen, the dinner table starts to look a lot less appetizing, 33% less appetizing when we don't have bees around. And I personally rely on a lot of fruits and vegetables for my diet when I'm not eating too much ice cream. And I really personally could see that my diet would be nowhere near as excellent as it is right now if it weren't for bees and the pollination work that they do. There are 4,000 species of native bees in North America, more than 20,000 species of bees around the world. And all of those bees are pollinators. They're pollinating, in addition to pollinating the plants that we eat, they're pollinating the wildflowers. If it's got a beautiful flower on it, that plant is likely to be pollinated by bees. So bees are responsible for pollination services, not just for what keeps us eating, but for what keeps the rest of the world, of the ecosystems of the world, eating as well. Bees are, up until the last 250 years, bees have been one of the most successful creatures on planet Earth. by far, along with beetles and ants and humans. Bees are really excellent at working together, at communication, and at building infrastructure. And these are things that we find in ants and beetles as well as humans. And so we should definitely admire these creatures that we have so much in common with. Now, 1 in 4 bees are at risk of extinction. The Center for Biological Diversity reports, and more than half of the bee species in North America are in decline. Here in Minnesota, we've got the rusty patch bumblebee as our state bee, and rusty patch is one of the 2 bees in the intercontinental United States that are listed as endangered. And so we need to do everything we can. Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Twin Cities area is a critical habitat space for rusty patch bumblebee. And so we need to do everything we can to support bees in our yard. Rusty is listed as endangered because the research has been done on the rusty patch. The research maybe hasn't been done on the other, I believe there's 400 species of bees in Minnesota. And so we can use rusty as an indicator because we know that the same things that are happening to rusty patch are happening to all the other bees as well. So facing extinction is it's no joke. Once a bee is gone, once a species is gone, we lose it forever, and that's no good. Okay, let's get into this. Well, what is a bee lawn? Bee lawns are the second step toward restoring the landscape. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've outlined at Minnehaha Falls Landscape 7 steps to landscape restorations. And I'm going to just say these really quick. Going organic, first and foremost, is the most important step. You can't really have a bee lawn unless you're going organic. And the reason I say that is we don't want to create chemical traps. Fungicides, herbicides, and certainly insecticides all will kill or harm bees. We want to make sure that we're going organic as our first step towards landscape restoration. Bee lawns, definitely the second step. After that, veggie gardens. You know, once you got your bee lawn in, you're going to have plenty of pollinators around for your veggie gardens. And veggie gardens start growing even deeper roots than bee lawns, which then, you know, a pollinator pocket garden is a great option for restoring the landscape and bringing even more pollinators. We're going to go into pollinator pocket gardens as well in our Beyond part tonight. Then, of course, we've got, if you take your pollinator pocket garden and you expand it throughout the whole space in your lawn, well, then you've got a prairie meadow. And once you start popping in some edible plants into that prairie meadow, some fruit trees and shrubs, then you're going to start growing your food forest. And before you leave a property, put in a few of Minnesota's peak ecosystem succession plants, such as white pine or red pine, and create yourself a love forest for generations to come to share. Now, bee lawns, there are 2 basic seed mixes for bee lawns. There's the clover-based and the yarrow-based. Now, I call them clover and yarrow-based because in terms of blooms, that's what shows the most in each of these mixes. However, both of them are most heavily based on fescue grass. So the clover-based has Dutch white clover, Trifolium repens, that's about 5% of the seed mix. Then we've got creeping thyme, and that's coming in at about 2% or 1% of the seed mix. Then we've got self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. This is about 2% of the seed mix. Self-heal is in both the clover-based and the yarrow-based mix. Fescue grass. Fescue grass is the no-mow grass that we think of for the state of Minnesota. It's a native grass. It's drought resistant. It's strong. It has this beautiful sweeping look to it. This picture was taken right off of, I believe this is Lake of the Isles, and just gorgeous, gorgeous option for having a no-mow space. And it's about 92% of the seed mix for either the clover or the yarrow-based bee lawn. Now, if you're going for the yarrow, which is also all native in its mix, it has yak yarrow, which is about 1% of the mix, and blue-eyed grass, about 3% of the mix, which a blue-eyed grass is a miniature iris, essentially, and really a gorgeous plant. Um, and actually here we see, instead of a bee on the plant, we see a fly, which is a wonderful reminder that flies are excellent pollinators as well as mosquitoes and midges and ants, beetles, many other insects pollinate in addition to bees, butterflies, moths. So we owe a great debt to all sorts of insect creatures, not just our beautiful buzzing bee friends. Okay, so again, we've got the 2 seed mixes. Now, let's back up just a second and look at this Dutch white clover. And I want to just use this as an example. Dutch white clover is the heavy hitter in the bee lawn options. This plant, as James Wolfen's report pointed out, his study showed, will feed over 55 species of native bees, at least 55 species of native bees. That's incredible. And then additionally, it feeds honeybees. And honeybees, we should all remember, are non-native. When we're thinking about bees, honeybees are to native bees what chickens are to native birds. They are a farmed creature. They are a farm animal. And but all bees, not all, but 55 species of native bees plus honeybees love white clover. Interestingly, Dutch white clover, non-native plant, absolutely strong spreader, but we don't hate Dutch white clover, and we don't call it invasive. This is a naturalized species. That means that it has moved in. It didn't used to be here, it moved in, but it's doing massive ecosystem services. And so it's very important now, especially in our, I'll refer to our urban and suburban and even our rural landscapes as damaged. Damaged by the agriculture and development methods that we utilize, and the management methods that we utilize. And so Dutch white clover is an excellent plant, even though it's non-native, is an excellent plant for healing the landscape. In addition to feeding bees, Dutch white clover will, as a legume, add a lot of nitrogen to the ground. And when used in a bee lawn seed mix, it can add multiple pounds of nitrogen per year into the ground in any given 1,000 square feet. And that's incredible. That's a lot of nitrogen. That's the majority of what goes into fertilizers, is nitrogen. So we can skip out on the fertilizer once we get the bee lawn established, because it is going to provide that nitrogen itself, for itself and for the rest of the plants in the bee lawn seed mix. The creeping time grows, let me just say also that the white clover will grow in the sun or the shade. Creeping thyme mostly grows in the sun. It likes those hot sunny lawns. It likes the hot sunny spots. I have had one bee lawn where the client just wanted thyme and fescue grass, not the clover, not the self-heal. Okay, so that's what we did for them. So you can mix and match with your bee lawn. If you get the bee lawn seed mix, it's going to have either the 4 with the clover base or the 4 with the yarrow base, but you can mix and match if you just get the seeds on their own. Creeping thyme, this is the culinary thyme. We can use this. This is edible, it's delicious, and the bees love it. Self-heal, Prunella vulgaris. This is a member of the mint family, strong bloomer, won't really bloom shorter than around 4.5 inches if it's cut shorter than around 4.5 inches. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that when we get into mowing. But it's an excellent plant. The bees love it. Any mint relative, bees absolutely adore. Fescue grass, we talked about, just a great option. Wonderful grass for Minnesota especially, and basically all northern climates can do really well with fescue grass. It's just a great no-mow, super low maintenance option. The yarrow, we've all seen yarrow growing in lawns here and there if we've looked close. This is yarrow millefolium. Millefolium means 1,000 leaves. It has lots and lots of leaves on each, tiny leaves on each stem. Feeds many different species of pollinators. We see a wasp and a moth here, keeping in mind, of course, that wasps and hornets, all kinds of insects that we may not be enamored of, they still play an important role in the landscape. And speaking of enamored, that reminds me, when do bees get married? when they find their honey. Oh, I'll be here all night, folks. Blue-eyed grass. Okay, blue-eyed grass is, again, a miniature iris. This one only grows about 3.5 to 5 inches tall. It's a real cutie. Not a huge proportion of the seed mix, but does come in the shade and it takes a couple years to start blooming from what I've seen. Now let's talk about the freebies. The ones that come in, the plants that come in on their own and they start feeding bees on their own. So of course we all know dandelion. I see on social media a lot of controversy around dandelion and are they good, are they bad? They're good. They're feeding bees. Let's drop the controversy because most of that controversy that we see around plants online is promoted secretly by the lobbying arms of the pesticide industry. They will have universities create studies condemning certain plants. They will do a lot of secret marketing. When I was the chair of the Minneapolis Parks Pesticide Advisory Committee, they really worked hard to organize, to thwart efforts to reduce and eliminate pesticides at Minneapolis parks. So, you know, just don't believe the hype. If you see bees on it, it's feeding bees, and that's a good thing. And besides, dandelions have deeper roots. It's almost inevitable when you pull a dandelion out of the ground, you're going to find a worm on that root. There's a lot of life all over the root zone there for dandelions. They're an excellent way to begin healing ecosystems. And again, well, there is a native species of dandelions, first of all, that needs to be said, but Taraxacum is non-native, and yet this is a naturalized species, not an invasive, and it's all over the world. Those dandelion seeds can go up into the upper atmosphere and travel all around the world. So whether or not we call dandelion native is really, that's maybe a call that may be changed later you know, scientists change their mind sometimes. Okay, now this is going to be a little controversial perhaps. Good Time Charlie. Who am I talking about here? Oh, we all know this guy. This is Creeping Charlie. Well, Creeping Charlie is, again, a member of the mint family, feeds lots of different bees, lots of hype out there about Creeping Charlie, but it's low, it's walkable, it's drought resistant, feeds bees, grows deeper roots than Kentucky bluegrass, and if you want to mow it, you could without any harm. I love Creeping Charlie, and I know that's quite controversial in certain circles. The only place I don't really like it is in my strawberry patch because it'll take over there, but up underneath shrubs is a part of the bee lawn, in the perennial garden as a ground cover. Hey, nobody likes a creep, so we gave him a new name. Now he's Good Time Charlie, and Good Time Charlie's invited to all the garden parties. Wood sorrel, another freebie out there. Wood sorrel is delicious. It tastes like lemons. It's got a heart-shaped leaf. You can almost see that in the image here. It has a heart-shaped leaf. It's kind of bright green foliage, and the flower is just a little bitty yellow flower. Delicious. Every part of the plant is edible. It has oxalic acid in it, so we don't want to eat tons of it, but it's awesome as a garnish in a salad. Wonderful plant. And feeds bees. Freebie. Comes along in almost every lawn and garden on its own, and we can just let it grow. You probably already have wood sorrel in your yard. Chickweed we see in some lawns as well. Chickweed's another bee feeder. And so if you see chickweed coming along in your garden, don't grab for the herbicides. Keep in mind that a lot of these weeds are freebies. They're going to feed the bees. Now we can take the bee lawn to the next level and really maximize things because we know bees love all kinds of flowers. Prairie pussy toes is a native flower that does excellent in sun, even part shade. I've seen it in some not deep shade, but some pretty good shade. And growing naturally as a native in prairies, and also in people's yards and gardens. It's a wonderful, cute little plant. Really hugs the ground, super low, very tight to the ground, and then the blooms come up about 3 or 4 or 5 inches like that. I love prairie pussy toes, Antonaria neglecta, a wonderful plant for a bee lawn. You would add it in as a plug. You could get a plant like this at one of the native nurseries. I love to utilize Landscape Alternatives, Prairie Restorations, Outback Nursery, several native nurseries around that are just excellent sources. Common violet, most of us have common violet in our lawn. It's an excellent plant, I love it. There are many different types of violet that move throughout our lawns and gardens. All of them are feeding bees, and they're free and they're coming along. Gotta love that. Scilla is a little bit controversial. I see some controversy around Scilla, also called squill. This plant mostly feeds honeybees. But that's a good thing because we don't want the honeybees to be competing too hard with our native bees for pollen and nectar resources. So if you see somebody with a lot of blue little bitty bulbs that are coming up just about 3 inches in the springtime throughout their lawn, even before the grass kind of wakes up, we got all these little blue throughout the lawn or garden. That's Scilla. It's feeding honeybees. In addition to several native plants, it's a great plant. I would never want to have a landscape that was devoid of native plants, but adding a few of these non-natives in, I think, doesn't necessarily hurt anybody. It can actually help. Now, how to bee lawn. Okay, we're talking about a transition, and then we're talking about maintenance whenever we're moving into bee lawns. And so let's get into how we transition a bee lawn. We've got a rapid transition approach here at Minnehaha Falls Landscape and a moderate transition approach. And we call the moderate transition moderate and not slow because it would be hard to sell anything that's called slow, but that's what I tell all my clients, that's why we call it that. And so full disclosure, moderate transition does mean a kind of a slower pace. Rapid, of course, that's referring to the pace as well. Now, the transition for any health in the landscape starts in the soil. And what is soil? Well, it's a collection of living organisms. The soil is a web of life, and it's based on fungi and bacteria. They're the main living organisms in the soil profile in any healthy soil. And they are feeding off of the organic matter and the sugars that plants are leaving and emitting into the ground. Off of the fungi and bacteria then feed all sorts of other creatures, a whole web of life, the nematodes, microarthropods, full-size arthropods, and protozoa, and then feeding off of those creatures are even larger insects and birds, and everybody's getting something to eat out of the soil. Ultimately, everything good comes out of the soil and everything goes back to the soil. Succession then. So healthy soil isn't just healthy soil everywhere you look. There's a change in the way and what's required to make a soil healthy, depending on what type of plant and what ecosystem, what phase of ecosystem succession you're in. And so we could see this play out in any national forest or state park where the gopher digs or the buffalo come through or the elk come through and kick it all up. There's going to be some bare soil. And over a number of years, that bare soil will be colonized by lichens and moss. That will begin to add a little bit of organic matter in the soil. That will begin to feed bacteria. So early stage succession soils are bacterially dominated. There's not almost nothing else alive in those soils, just the bacteria. As then the weeds begin to grow, weeds are early ecosystem succession plants. As they begin to grow, they add organic matter to the soil, which grows even more bacteria and begins to grow fungi. So we still have in the ecosystems that are dominated by weeds, we still have a bacterially dominated soil, but we begin to get a little more fungi. As we move into prairie and shrub ecosystem succession, what we're seeing is an equal balance of bacteria and fungi. And when we get into the prairie zone, now this is, if you didn't realize it already, this is gonna really show that I'm a big old nerd. And you don't have to remember this, but just for the record, a healthy soil in a prairie or a veggie garden or a shrub garden, a healthy soil is going to consist of at least 350 micrograms per gram of soil of fungi and 350 micrograms per gram of soil of bacteria. And once you get that much biomass of fungi and bacteria growing, then there's going to be enough nutrient exchange to protect plants, to feed them, and to keep things healthy in the garden. And beyond that, you want to look for, as a grower, especially professional growers, want to be looking for the ratio of fungi to bacteria, which, as we can see through this little image, gets even more fungal as more organic matter is placed in the ground, as the plant roots get deeper and the plants get more woody. So in peak climax succession forest, we're seeing a completely fungally dominated system in which there is 10 times more fungi than bacteria, and there can be around 7,000 micrograms per gram of soil of fungi and around 700 micrograms per gram of soil of bacteria. In that bare soil and those very first early stages of succession, we're only seeing maybe 10 micrograms per gram of soil of bacteria and no fungi. So you can see that we're changing, not only are we getting more of both fungi and bacteria along throughout ecosystem succession, but we're also, then the ratio is changing as well and becoming more fungally dominant as plants get more woody. Okay, now the bacteria and fungi, what they're doing underground is enormous. This is a magnified picture 400 times from my microscope, and it shows a bacterial aggregate and fungal hyphae. As soils mature, as they age, bacteria stick together around pieces of organic matter, and then they also grab onto the sticky substance on the outside of their bodies, sticks on to pieces of sand, silt, and clay, and it pulls those pieces of sand, silt, and clay and organic matter into these microaggregates and holds them apart from one another, so that they're not just those particles of soil aren't just collapsing on top of one another, and instead they're held in these microaggregates, and then the bacteria are processing over and over and over again the nutrition from the organic matter inside these microaggregates, and that's what is creating then this beautiful chocolate brown humic acid that we see inside these microaggregates. And that humic acid is essentially long chains of carbon. This is a carbon sequestration storage mechanism. It's not just a carbon sequestration storage mechanism, it is the carbon sequestration storage mechanism on planet Earth. This is the best way that we have of storing carbon in soils, and it is only because we have disturbed so much soil on Earth that it is half because we've disturbed so much soil on Earth that our climate is wildly out of control. Half of the carbon in the atmosphere approximately comes from burning fossil fuels, and half of it comes from disturbing land through agriculture and development. We see then in this image also a strand of fungi, a few strands of fungi growing in between those microaggregates and pushing them apart. And the fungi love that humic acid. They can find all the food they need on it. So their spores will sprout inside those microaggregates, pushing them apart as the fungal hyphae, those tubes, as they grow through the soil profile, pushing those aggregates apart and holding them in situation. And now the soil's become a sponge. And so now air and water can flow through the soil and be absorbed and be cleaned by all these microorganisms within the soil profile. This happens in a bee lawn. This does not happen in a standard issue lawn. We need much more of this. We need as deep root profiles as we possibly can. That means we need to get as tall of plants as we possibly can. Bee lawns are a little bit taller than a regular lawn. They're going to give us a little bit deeper roots. We're going to have much more soil aggregation because clover and thyme and fescue grass much better at putting sugar and organic matter into the soil than Kentucky bluegrass and perennial rye. So here we've got carbon sequestration and cleaning rainwater before it hits local waterways, all here in our bee lawn. This is what those aggregates look like on a visual level. You can hold this in your hand, and we've all seen this in our soil profile. We've seen strands of mycelium running through the soil. These strands of mycelium are actually thousands and thousands of those hyphae bound together. And so this is what healthy soil looks like. You can see the sponge-like quality of this soil. Thousands of hyphae binding together to create those mycelium. And we're going to come back to mycelium towards the end of the discussion because mycelium play a very important role for bees. Okay, now if we're going to transition, let's talk about that rapid transition method first. Okay, rapid transition is 7 steps essentially. Okay, first step is you're going to remove the existing lawn. That you can see we use a sod cutter. You can get a gas-powered sod cutter or use the old-fashioned sod kicker. It's a difficult task. Then we've got our aerator. We need to aerate that compacted soil to break through the compaction layer so that the fungi and bacteria can grow. We're then going to seed, and then we're going to add compost. I get our compost from Current Landscape Resources in St. Paul. We use their leaf compost. It is excellent for sprouting seeds, just absolutely excellent. Then you want to seed again on top of that compost. So you're seeding below the compost and on top of the compost. This is going to make a lawn that grows really well. By the way, these methods work for any kind of lawn seed mix you want to use, whether it's bee lawn or standard lawn. This is how you establish an organic lawn. Step number 6, that is a blanket rolled out, a seed blanket. We use a netless blanket, doesn't have any plastic in it. It's we get ours from Twin City Seed, and it's a fiber blanket that is made out of wood fiber and biodegrades. Step 7 is you water, 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 and you need to water a lot. We give our clients a watering schedule that's based on temperatures. Think like this: if it's in the 90s when you're doing one of these, it's not going to be as easy on you. You're going to be watering basically all day long to keep that going. You want to do your bee lawns in the spring or fall. It's much easier. You can do them in the summer, but it takes a lot of watering. And it will affect what seeds pop depending on how warm the soil is, and the conditions can really affect that. Let's see here. Okay, here's what a rapid transition looks like after 2 weeks. We see the grass starting to grow. There's some small clover coming up in here. In the first couple weeks, the grass is the most predominant thing that you're going to see, and you're going to see it sprouting right up through that seed blanket, and it's going to be a little patchy at first. Takes a little bit. After a few, just even a couple months though, that clover starts going, and a rapid transition in a sunny space always ends up looking in the first couple years like a field of clover. So it's a much different looking lawn. This can get up to 10 inches tall when you do that excellent soil preparation that I just showed you. The more you walk on it, the shorter it's going to be. You can mow it, but I always say, well, we'll get into mowing in a little bit here. Let's keep on looking at some pictures. Rapid transition after 1 year. Again, very clover heavy. We start to see that grass is starting to come in a little bit more. After 2 years, we see that this picture I just took a couple weeks ago, so it's kind of a fall time picture, and we can see that the grass is starting to come in a little bit more thick, and this is actually usually a fairly sunny lawn, just that time of day. So this is what after about 2 years, and if you do a rapid transition, it's going to kind of keep on looking about like this over time. This is the lawn I mentioned earlier. Now this is one where we just did thyme and fescue, and this one is about 3 years old. So very fescue predominant. You can see the thyme is kind of in little swaths here and there. Okay. Now if we're going to do a moderate paced or a slow paced transition, then what we're going to do is aerate and overseed and add organic fertility 3 times per year. And so we're not going to remove the existing lawn. That can be a barrier for some folks in budget or in the ability to do the labor. And so instead, you do have this option of keeping the lawn that you have and transitioning slowly. This will never eliminate the Kentucky bluegrass. In fact, adding the aeration and the organic fertilizer is actually going to encourage that Kentucky bluegrass. But adding in this seed is going 3 times per year for 3 years is really going to encourage your bee lawn seed mix to start coming out. After 2 years, you start to see that clover really starting to sprout. It would be hard for us to sit here and pick out exactly which is the Kentucky bluegrass and exactly which is the fescue grass in this image, but they're both there. There's also probably perennial rye in here. And this picture was just taken a couple weeks ago. Most lawns that are organic are already kind of a bee lawn and already kind of look like this. So you're not going to expect, if you're already having an organic lawn and you start using the modern transition, you're not going to expect to have a wow change right away. Things are going to change slowly. Okay. After a few years, you're really going to start to see a difference in the lawn. We've got, you start to see the clover really start coming up. If you don't mow shorter than 4.5 inches, you're going to start to see self-heal coming up every now and then. I think this self-heal is actually a little shorter than that, maybe about 3-4 inches, but it usually doesn't bloom unless you're at 4.5, 5 inches. So that's 3 years on in a modern transition. Here's 5 years on. You really see that fescue grass coming in stronger than the perennial rye and the Kentucky bluegrass. So it will take over, and you can really start to see that that the self-heal is growing really well. Beautiful plant, that self-heal. I love it too, because as a purple bloomer, hey, now we can all forget about Creeping Charlie and worrying about that, because now we've got this intentional purple plant in our yard. Conditions will decide what grows where. This is all the same seed mix. You may want to have the clover come out stronger or the fescue come out stronger. You're going to have to you make your own special seed mix to do that, because the conditions will really affect what happens. If you're in a very shady spot, you're going to get a little bit less of everything, more fescue, certainly less thyme, less clover. There will still be some clover in those shady spots. In the sunny spots, when you do a rapid transition, the clover really takes over. Conditions will really, these are all 3 rapid transition spaces, and conditions, they all use the same seed mix, but conditions decided to pull different seeds. And I couldn't exactly pin exactly what conditions decided to help grow what where, but it does seem like the shadier it is, the more you're going to have a fescue-based bee lawn. The sunnier it is, the more the clover and other elements will show. Okay, let's talk about maintenance and mowing. To mow or not to mow. Here we go. First of all, mowing tips. Only mow when and where needed. We're gonna with a bee lawn reduce mowing as much as possible, because we've invited bees into this space and we don't want to scare them off. We don't want to chop them up with a mower. That's a nightmare. So what we want to do instead is, if we're going to mow in any space, we want to walk through that space to scare off the pollinators that are there. Walk through, kind of brush the grass, maybe use a broom, scare away the pollinators, be gentle, and make sure that the bees and moths and butterflies aren't hanging out on the lawn you're about to mow. Think about mowing special patterns. Think about changing the timing. A lot of folks doing the no mow May. Here are some special pattern ideas. Adding a bee lawn to a neighborhood that doesn't have one yet can be a little bit of a gamble aesthetically. And so maybe you will do some mowing to help distinguish this space is still cared for. This is intentional. We're doing this on purpose. You might mow your edge. You might mow an island or a pathway through the space. Here's a picture I took yesterday of a garden we did last year, where we put in these 2 birch trees, and we used the bee lawn seed mix around the birch trees as a living mulch, and then the client just mows the outer perimeter of that. It's a ongoing mulch that'll last for forever underneath these trees, and it's a wonderful pollinator friendly space. You can be creative with your mowing patterns. This is a really fun labyrinth that's created in a no-mow fescue lawn. No-mow fescue on its own without the bee lawn is a much higher maintenance option. If you want to try to go for fescue on its own without the bee lawn, you're going to end up trying to pull weeds quite a bit, and really working on that soil health and overseeding quite a lot with your fescue to make sure that you're maintaining a space where it can grow. Once it's established, it'll be really strong, but keeping the weeds out of it during establishment is much harder than if you have the bee lawn. The bee lawn with a rapid transition is really quite easy to keep the weeds out of a space if you're transitioning from a standard lawn to a bee lawn. A lot of folks doing no-mow May. It's very popular, getting a lot of attention. Roseville, other municipalities have started allowing it, encouraging it. Edina passed a no-mow May resolution this year. I mean, the cats and the dogs must be sleeping with each other because, oh my gosh, the Edina is allowing no-mow May. What a wonderful thing. News channels around the country are picking this up, taking no-mow May and running with it. It's wonderful. Allow those blooms in your lawn. The less we're mowing throughout the season, the better for the bees, the better for everybody. Here are some very important tips for mowing in regards to your bee lawn. If you're going to mow a bee lawn, these are some must-haves. 5-inch rule. We don't want to mow shorter than 5 inches. Most mowers don't have a 5-inch setting. They only go to about 4 inches. I've seen folks modify their lawnmowers, get special wheels to raise the lawnmower height so that you can be at that 5 inches. You might sharpen your mower blades 3 or 4 times per season, and you never cut off more than a third of the leaf blade height at any one time. Those last two are about the health of the plants. The plant is using its greenery, its foliage to photosynthesize with, and through photosynthesis, it's creating sugars that it's feeding itself. It's also feeding those sugars to the fungi and bacteria in the ground in a beautiful interconnected life strategy that allows the plants to grow really well. When we cut off more than a third of the plant's height at any one time, or when we use a dull mower blade and we're ripping and tearing those plants apart, we are doing damage to the plants that causes them to have to shed roots, to have to focus on just the mother plant instead of the spreading wings of the plant. When we cut it too short, it also does that. It kind of freaks the plants out. We want to mow high. In a standard lawn, it's like a 3-inch rule. In the bee lawn, it's about a 5-inch rule. But the other two rules apply also to a standard lawn. Now, again, you don't necessarily want to mow a bee lawn. These are if you feel like you have to mow. And you might, if you do feel like you have to mow, maybe try and limit it. If you start getting tall weeds in the lawn, if you start getting weed trees growing up in the lawn, then mow it maybe once per year around September 15th. After things are kind of, all the bees have left the lawn and it's mostly just kind of dying grass and such, mow it then, and that will cut down those tall plants, the weed trees and such, and will help manage those. Otherwise, just really try to limit mowing in a bee lawn. Some common problems we see with folks attempting their bee lawn installations. First of all, grubs. People say, oh, I got grubs, it's going to be so difficult. Well, actually, bee lawns totally eliminate grubs problem. Grubs are going to be handled when we have a, actually, I think I've got a slide on that, but grubs are going to be handled when we have a strong ecosystem in the soil, strong soil health system. One major problem I see folks doing is jumping the gun, starting too early, ending up with a field of weeds, and then trying to go in and bee lawn that field of weeds. Once your crabgrass and quackgrass and other perennial and annual weed grasses take over, it is very difficult to establish a bee lawn. Everything that we do will essentially serve those grasses and those weeds. And what you have to do is essentially use a tractor or something to remove the top inch of soil where all those weed seeds are going to be, and it's an enormous undertaking. So don't jump the gun and remove everything until you're ready with the compost and your blanket and your seed and your aerator so that you can actually have success. The use of pesticides, also something I see a lot of folks still doing in a bee lawn. They might say, oh, I'm using pesticides in the trees, or I'm using pesticides, you know, a fungicide over here, or I'm trying to kill ants inside or something like that. All of those are going to spread out throughout, and because of the deeply interconnected nature of our landscapes, those pesticides will do harm much further than just the target insect or target organism. So please don't use any pesticides in bee lawns. This is an example of where pesticides were used. You can see this bumblebee's tongue sticking out, and that long brown piece, that's its tongue, and coming out the end of its proboscis. And that's a sign that a bee has been killed through poisoning, is when their tongue is sticking out after death. Very sad. This was a picture I took. There were several dead bees, and so they had probably gone and gotten something that somebody had sprayed, trying to kill some other insect or some plant or something somewhere. So again, grubs and fungal diseases, they're a sign of poor soil health. They're not a major issue in bee lawns because we have excellent soil health in a good bee lawn. That's what a grub lawn looks like. There's a grub there on the bottom. Grub lawns and fungal diseases, grub issues and fungal diseases affect lawns all over the Twin Cities in a big way, and keep on getting worse and worse and worse as our climate gets hotter and hotter. Kentucky bluegrass does not make a soil system that can stand up to grubs. Beneficial nematodes and beneficial fungi equal no more grubs. So when your fungi is growing really well, that's the big picture there. In the background, we see that fungal hyphae really spreading out, those tubes of fungi magnified 400 times. When that is spreading through the soil profile and holding the soil in a sponge-like texture, then lots of nematodes can crawl through the soil, swim through the soil profile, and those nematodes have on their bodies a milky spore bacteria. That milky spore bacteria is poisonous. Well, it has a toxin on it that kills grubs. Specifically, it can kill grubs. So it goes inside the grubs, it kills the grubs, and then the nematodes crawl inside the, excuse me, what I should say is the nematodes crawl inside the grubs, they kill the grubs with that milky spore bacteria. The nematodes then eat and breed inside the grubs. It's disgusting and awful and wonderful because it's what happens to control grubs in a healthy soil system. So you really don't have to worry about grubs when you have a bee lawn. That's a huge benefit. Okay, well, we've really gone through bee lawns in the kind of how-to and the why and the how-to. Now let's jump into bee lawns and beyond, because bee lawns are a starting place for soil health and ecosystem landscape health. And the next phase after that, veggie gardens is the next phase, but the fourth phase is pollinator pocket gardens. And the pollinator pocket gardens are, again, they're the fourth step in ecosystem restoration. We went through these steps earlier. Pollinator pocket gardens are actually another great way to use the bee lawn seed mix. So as we know, health starts in the soil for any soil, and as you can see here on the picture, this is just one season of growth in a garden that we planted with 6-inch pots. This is only 3 months of growth, and so that's the kind of growth you should be getting when you do your soil right. And so what I mean by that is, in a pollinator pocket garden, we're going to remove any sod or other impediments to growth. Then we're going to come in with a mixture of 25% manure, 75% shredded wood mulch. Again, we get that from Kern Landscape Resources. Then we take that mulch and manure and we add it about 4 to 6 inches deep on top of the garden bed, and we use shovels to turn the garden soils over. That breaks through the compaction layer and adds that organic matter down below ground. 25% manure to feed bacteria, 75% wood mulch to feed the fungi. That is going to kickstart your growth in a big way for any pollinator pocket garden. Now, we use the bee lawn seed mix as a living mulch inside our pollinator pocket gardens. This image of this garden here, we see some little blue stem and grass and some calamintha there blooming in white, and surrounding it all is clover, white clover. and fescue grass. And that's my favorite way to use bee lawn, is as a living mulch throughout the garden. We don't have to mulch this garden. The bee lawn seed mix surrounds these taller perennials. The taller perennials shoot up over the top of it. Use this as a ground cover. And then it's a ground cover that's adding nitrogen and pollinators all throughout the landscape. It's a wonderful ground cover. We use it all over the place. There, the image with the cone flowers. You can see that bee lawn seed mix has, again, that's in the shade a little bit, so it has a lot less clover in it. And then you can see here, there's one with a little bit more clover. This image has some more little blue stem grass in it. The blue stem grass just loves being surrounded by fescue grass and clover. And so those grasses have only been in the ground for a year. Same with the picture of the coneflowers. They're doing great after only just a year in the ground. All of that soil prep work and the seed mix really makes the difference. Love to use the bee lawn seed mix around flagstone pathways, paver pathways. It's just a wonderful seed mix. You can walk on it. You can mow it if you want to. It's definitely drought resistant. And just so start getting creative and utilizing that bee lawn seed mix all over the place. This is a garden that we call a prairie meadow. This is that fifth phase of landscape restoration, where we removed all of the lawn from a space, and then we brought in a mix of pollinator plants, native prairie plants, and bee lawn seed mix. And so you can see the pictures, the two pictures labeled July 11th, and then the two pictures, July 11th, 2021, and then the two pictures labeled July 11th, 2022. So these images are each taken 1 year apart. The images on the left there are images of 1 week after installation for 2021. That's 1 week after installation. Then the image 2022, that's 1 year after installation. That's the type of growth, the volume of growth. Look at, you can even see how big the tree got in the meantime. Things are growing gangbusters in this soil because we did our soil prep methods with a 75-25 blend, and we added the bee lawn seed mix as a ground cover. It just helps everything grow. Here's a shout out to ground nesting pollinators. We do want to have a little bit of space here and there with some mulch, lots of bees and wasps that nest in the ground, very important pollinators. And we want to, if we see a nest in the ground, make sure you just stay away from it. Let something grow in front of it next year. They don't need massive amounts of space, just a square foot or two here or there of a mulched area will invite bees, ground nesting bees, to come into the garden space. So here we are. Let's go through. We've been here for about an hour. I've got maybe another half hour. We're going to move through a long list of some of my favorite plants. What I've done here now for the rest of the presentation for our bee lawns and beyond is to think about those plants that will work in our pollinator pocket gardens, in our prairie meadow landscapes, and we can take our bee lawn and we can just start plugging these plants in here and there into the bee lawn and use the bee lawn that we've grown as our living mulch or our ground cover, our cover crop under and around all of our larger perennials that we put in. So let's explore some perennials that bees absolutely love. Spotted bee balm. Wow, this is a heavy hitter. The bees go nuts. Of course, we're going to talk about bee balm, but there's also spotted bee balm, both different plants, wonderful plants, two different types of Monarda. Spotted bee balm, big plug for that. Calamintha, you've never seen more bees. You've never seen more bees than you will on your Calamintha plants. They're incredible. Calamintha, absolute must have if you love having all the huge variety of bees around. It is incredible. I can't say enough. Every garden I plant that's in any amount of sun gets Calamintha. Anise hyssop, heavy hitter. Bees love anise hyssop. Bees will, when this is in bloom, they will just absolutely flock to it. They'll be covering it morning, noon, and night. All the different bees love anise hyssop. Joe Pye weed, wonderful bee-friendly plant. Also going to bring in the monarch butterflies. You can see there an image of a bee on my hand, and that must mean that there was beauty in my eye that day, because of course we all know that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Oh, Okay, Joe Pyeweed, love that Joe Pyeweed. Milkweed, everybody needs milkweed. We've got to grow milkweed in all of our different gardens. Of course, this is the monarch butterfly's habitat plant, but the bees love it too. So we want to use swamp milkweed in the rain gardens and shorelines, common milkweed in our garden beds. Butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, where we have a hot sunny spot like on the boulevard, and then poke milkweed, Asclepias exaltata in our shade gardens. Wonderful plants. Milkweeds are so beautiful. They freely seed. Once you start, you take a few, you plug them into the bee lawn and start growing those out every year, and they're going to start spreading throughout your bee lawn as well. Bee balm, #1 favorite plant of rusty patch bumblebees. Gotta have some bee balm in your yard. Bees love bee balm. Goldenrod. This time of year, we're seeing it everywhere. Some folks think this makes you sneeze. It doesn't. Any flower that's yellow is going to be pollinated by bees. That means its pollen is not out in the wind. Any flower that's colorful, in fact. And so this is goldenrod, many different kinds. All of the goldenrods that we have in our Minnesota gardens are very helpful for bees. They love goldenrod. Culver's root. Bees will swarm Culver's root. They love Culver's root. Nice, tall, sunny perennial. Cup plant. Monarch butterflies love cup plant. Finches love cup plant. Lots of little birds will come and drink water and eat the seeds from the cup plant. And bees absolutely adore cup plant. This is a cup plant from the Eloise Butler Wildflower Gardens in Minneapolis. Okay, if you like your monarchs, you're going to need to get some meadow blazing star. Monarch butterflies will buy tickets and line up around the block just to eat from your meadow blazing star. They love it. It's their favorite nectar source. The other blazing stars are great. They're good for bringing in bees and moths, but they don't bring in the monarchs like meadow blazing star does. Liatris ligustylus is the #1 favorite nectar source for monarch butterflies. Love, love, love. It's a nice tall, like 3 to 5 foot tall. It will grow between there. Wonderful plant, very, very pretty. Kind of got a snake-like structure, snaking up out of the garden. I just can't say enough good about meadow blazing star. Every single garden I plant that has any amount of sun gets meadow blazing star. Flodman thistle. Well, thistles happen to be not usually loved by people, but absolutely loved by pollinators. All sorts of insects love thistle. Flodman thistle is a native. I've seen some wonderful examples in state parks of flodman thistle used in prairie plantings. It's a great plant. Can't say enough good about thistles. Purple coneflower and pale purple coneflower. A lot of folks don't know that purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, is native a little further south than Minnesota, and the actual native coneflower, purplish coneflower for Minnesota, is Echinacea pallida. Both, however, wonderful for the butterflies, for the bees. I have both in my landscape. I love purple coneflowers. Lobelia. Blue lobelia, red lobelia, both are excellent for bees and hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love lobelia. Get some lobelia in your garden. Obedient plant does not obey. It'll spread all over, but we love spreading native plants because that's how we grow a low maintenance landscape. We might take 5 or 10 obedient plants and plug them into a fairly sunny, maybe a little bit damp portion of the garden, and let them just take over that area. They'll get, 1.5 to 3 feet tall, and the bees go nuts for obedient plant. Wonderful part of a native garden. Every garden should have asters. Every garden should have asters, whether you're in the sun or shade. Here's a couple for the sun. Again, we see here, that's a fly on the New England aster there, and that fly that kind of looks like a bee. Excellent pollinator, gotta have them. So wonderful to have all of these different insects visiting our yard. Asters this time of year, in the fall time here, wonderful bloomers. Still, I see bees even today out on the asters in my yard. And it's kind of getting late in the season here, September 27th. Clematis virginsbower, You want a vine, and you want a vine that is not going to destroy things and take over lifting structures out of the ground like a grapevine or so many of our trumpet vines and other woody vines like wisteria and others might do. Those woody vines can do a lot of damage. So maybe you want a soft tissue vine, but one that's vigorous. Clematis virginsbauer, that's Clematis virginiana. This is the native clematis. The bees go crazy. All the different pollinators go crazy for native clematis. Virginsbauer clematis climbs wonderfully. It'll climb 12, 15 feet tall. Definitely covers trellises on fences. Very thick. Most of the cultivated hybridized clematis, not so strong, but the Virginsbauer, the native clematis, very strong plant. Really good spreader, strong grower. And sun or shade. That's important to point out. It'll grow in sun or shade. Purple prairie clover, Dalea purpurea, wonderful little plant. Very cute. Love adding this into the seed mixes and bringing in the bees. Perennial sunflowers. There's so many different perennial sunflowers. Gotta have them. They're great. Wonderful for bringing in bees and butterflies. I see monarchs on my perennial sunflowers. Perennial sunflowers are great. Maximilian is probably my favorite perennial sunflower. Mountain mint really brings in the pollinators. Any mint plant will. Mountain mint is a very strong pollinator plant. You can see the wasp on here, very important pollinators, and the wasps and bees and flies all visiting. Here we've got a hummingbird moth on the prairie phlox. The diversity of plants that you install in the ground will not only bring a diversity of bees, but this wonderful menagerie of just amazing insects. And if you've never seen a hummingbird moth or a giant sphinx moth or a luna moth, some of these amazing creatures in your garden, add more of these pollinator plants, add more diversity, get those blooms stretched throughout the entire season, early spring to late fall, and you're going to start to see some of these creatures show up. Blue vervain, I've got some in my garden. The bees went nuts for it all spring and summer, late spring, early summer. They love it. It's a type of verbena perennial, does like a little bit more moist soil, great in the rain garden or wetland edge. Love verbena, love a blue vervain. Gray-headed coneflower, also called yellow-headed coneflower, Retibita, wonderful plant, beautiful strong spreader, nice yellow petals on it, beautiful plant, a great bee-friendly plant. Wild blue indigo, this plant can get 25-foot deep roots on it. It'll grow 3 or 4 feet tall, 25-foot deep roots, and it's a legume, so it's adding nitrogen to the ground all throughout that soil profile. Great feeder of bumblebees in particular. They love it. Bottle gentian, what a wonderful plant. Beautiful. You'll see bees using their proboscis to open it up and climb inside and grab that sweet nectar, taking pollen with them. Beautiful, lovely plant. We love the gentiana. Ironweed, monarch butterflies, yet again, and the swallowtails love ironweed. Veronia, great plant, very strong plant, can survive some pretty harsh conditions. I've seen it living on the boulevard outside of the Wedge Co-op for a number of years now, and that's if anybody's been down there, that's a really, that landscape's kind of rough. A lot of people walking on that boulevard and snow piled on it and driving past it all day long. But the ironweed stays and keeps feeding those bees. It's a great plant. Turtlehead, if you've never seen a bee wake up in the morning and crawl out of a flower and stretch its little arms and lick itself and get its wings going, it's the most amazing, cutest little sight in the world to behold. And turtlehead bumblebees will sometimes sleep in the turtlehead flowers overnight, and they'll crawl out and do their little morning routine, a little bit of yoga in the morning. It's the cutest thing in the world. Turtlehead is great. Love that plant. Bees will also sleep in the wild lupin plants. I love those little bee hotel plants. Just so wonderful. Wild lupin is gorgeous, beautiful plant. Can be kind of hard to procure sometimes, but once you get it, great plant. Beard tongue, penstemon. Not only do the bees love the penstemon, The hummingbirds love it. Got to have some beard tongue in the garden. So all the different penstemons, hummingbirds absolutely love, and the bees go crazy for them. The penstemon grandiflorus, excellent native plant. Then native sedges and grasses, their importance in the garden can't be underestimated. They are a great place for bees to gather dew in the morning. And also there's medicines that grow along with these native grasses and sedges. Some of my favorites, I love the little blue stem and the big blue stem. I love panicum grass. I love June grass. In sedges, I love Pennsylvania sedge in a dry kind of shady area. I love tussock sedge in the rain garden and shoreline. Explore your native grasses and sedges. Get a variety of them growing, and don't be afraid of the spreaders, because they're going to surround your plants. They're going to help the plants be stronger and stand up stronger so that the bees and butterflies can see the blooms. They're going to promote soil health. Spreading native grasses and sedges and clump forming native grasses and sedges, super important in our native pollinator pocket gardens. Now so those are almost entirely native plants in the last section, and now we're going to get into a few non-native plants that are still very important for bees. So here, spearmint, peppermint, any kind of mint that you're growing, perennial mint at home, those blooms will feed bees. Once we start talking about non-native plants and stuff, I want to just mention that we want to make sure that not only are we providing a majority of native plants in the yard, and that most of the new plants we get are native or fruiting or some type of edible, but that we're also purchasing plants from nurseries that refuse to use any pesticides. So you need to be checking in with your nurseries. Your big box stores, your Home Depot and grocery stores and Walmart and all that, they're going to be using plants that have pesticides. They might tell you one thing, but they are definitely using plants that have pesticides. Do not trust them. Do not go to them. Go to small local nurseries. Talk to the owners of the nurseries. Talk to the people who actually make the decisions and find out if they're using pesticides in their plants before you're buying new plants. Okay, let's go into comfrey. Wonderful, again, non-native plant that feeds so many different bees. I have comfrey in my yard. Does great in the shade. It will bloom for me twice per year, bringing in the bumblebees each time. The spring bloom's a little heavier. It's a gorgeous plant. I love comfrey. Peony, almost every house has a peony. If it doesn't, it should. Peonies are wonderful. Again, a non-native. If you have one, don't rip it out of the ground to put in a native plant, because think about it. If that peony's been in the ground for 10 years, 15 years, that's 10 years or 15 years of generations of pollinators training on going to that plant. They go, like the bees, for instance, go back to the hive and they buzz and they dance, and they dance to one another to show each other, to tell stories about where they've been, what they've gotten, where they found the food. They're pointing out, they're mapping out for folks to go to these plants. So if you have a pollination resource in your yard, even if it's non-native, maybe don't rip it out. Instead, rip out some lawn, take up some pavement, reduce the size of the overall dwelling size. These kind of things can vastly improve ecosystem health, while removing a non-native plant and swapping out for a native one isn't necessarily always the best option for creating health for pollinators. Let's see. Sedum. Oh boy, bees love sedum. It's such a great plant. They will be absolutely covering it, all the different sedums. They're covering it right now at this time of year. Let's see here then. Chives, there are native chives that we can add, all the different onion plants, allium of different sorts. Very good for bees. Bees just absolutely love it. You can see the pollen sac on this bee's leg just totally filled. That reminds me, what did the bee say to his prankster friend? Quit pollen my leg. Oh, okay. The chives, there we go. Now, Russian sage. A lot of folks have Russian sage in the garden. Wonderful, again, non-native. Maybe we should call it Ukrainian sage, but this is a beautiful plant and feeds lots of bees. Potent. A lot of these plants that you can see, bees love a lot of these medicinal plants, these plants that smell and actually are medicine. Wonderful plants. Catmint. Walker's Low is the varietal that's sold all over the place. Wonderful plant. We use this one in boulevards and such. If folks want a kind of a little bit tidier look than full-on native garden, maybe we'll convince them to go with catmint and peonies and Karl Forster grass, these kind of things, because they're also going to feed bees. They're going to be very good if we get organic sources and grow the soil health really well. And they'll keep that kind of a more formal, tidier look, some of these plants. Globe thistle, echinops, excellent bee feeder. I've used this in several gardens. It's wonderful for attracting bees. Okay, let's see. Now let's get into some annuals. Partridge pea is a spreading native annual. It will come back from seed every year. Don't worry about it being an annual. This plant will come back. I love self-seeding, spreading annuals. This is a native. This plant is awesome. I just can't sing its praises enough. When you see a big patch of partridge pea in bloom, the bees are all over it and they're humming so loud, and you can pick out the key even that they're humming in. They're humming so vibrantly, so loud. Now that leads me to bring up the fun fact that, and this is true, this isn't another bad dad joke, this is true, that bees hum, they buzz in the key of C. And when they buzz in the key, this is scientifically proven, when they buzz in the key of C, when they kind of have to like get their body in a special position to do this, when they do this, then the flowers explosively release the pollen. They just kind of spray the pollen. Oftentimes, the pollen will basically jump off of the stamens, off the plant, and jump onto the bee's legs and fuzz and body, so that the bee can take that pollen elsewhere. Buzzing in the key of C. So bees, they're also musicians. Got to give credit where due. Snow on the Mountain, again, another self-seeding native annual. Beautiful plant, feeds wasps, feeds bees, has this amazing white flower and variegated foliage with the really big white margins on it. Love Snow on the Mountain. This is a type of euphorbia. Euphorbias are very interesting plants. Purple top verbena, I call it verbena bee, Verbena bonariensis. Again, self-seeding annual. This one's non-native, and here in Minnesota, it will self-seed, not extravagantly. A few of the seeds will come back every year. I love it for that. It's a great self-seeding annual that the bees absolutely adore. Tithonia, also called Mexican sunflower. Love Tithonia, wonderful plant, feeds monarch butterflies. They always stop off at your Tithonia plants. Got to have some Tithonia in a sunny garden. And zinnias, again, make sure you're sourcing either your seeds or your starters from a source that will not use any pesticides. Unfortunately, so many plants are dipped in pesticides or treated with herbicides or fungicides that will affect the bees. And it's especially true with annuals. You don't want to buy your annuals from big box stores. You want to go to local nurseries in order to protect the bees. Zinnias, bees and butterflies, monarch butterflies, love the zinnias. My neighbor's got zinnias across the street. We have meadow blazing star. For the last, for all of August and early September, the monarchs were just back and forth all day long, back and forth from our boulevard to theirs, eating from those zinnias and the meadow blazing star. Okay, so let's get into some shady garden perennials. Woodland sunflower, absolute must have. Bees and monarch butterflies go crazy for it. Love the woodland sunflower. It's a strong spreader. Touch-me-nots. This is an impatient. This is a tall native impatient, grows in the shade, grows really well, self-seeding annual. I love those self-seeding annuals. This one is a wonderful plant. Excellent for the shade, spreads all over the place. And again, the bees they'll crawl up deep inside there. They'll be in there and they'll come out and they're stretching and they're getting their wings all ready to fly again. It's such a great plant. They call it touch-me-not because when the seed pods first become ripe, if you go up and you touch them, even just a light touch, the seed pods go poof and they explode. They just pop and the seeds go flying everywhere. So they should be called touch me please or touch me's, but of course, touch me not. cute little plant. Wonderful, wonderful spreading native plant. Asters for the shade. Everybody's got to have some asters. The big leaf, the blue wood asters, calico asters, heart-leafed asters. We see all over the place this time of year, asters of all different sorts, and lots of great options for the shade. Lion's foot. I'm just getting to know this plant. We just started using it this year. Prananthes alba, love it. I'm really enamored of it. It's a tall, shade blooming, summer blooming perennial. You don't get as many blooms in the shade in the summer, so it's great to use those, and especially those very bee-friendly ones like lion's foot when you can get a hold of them. Solomon seal. I love the graceful arching stems of the Solomon seal. Bees go crazy for it. Hairy wood mint, gotta have a mint. Everywhere you can get a mint, get a mint. Put those mints in the shade, put those mints in the sun. Hairy wood mint, excellent wood mint plant, bringing in the bees. False Solomon seal, again, all sorts of pollinators gonna use the false Solomon seal. That's a great plant. Golden seal is thought to be endangered or extinct in the wild in Minnesota. I've got it in my yard. It's a native plant, feeds bees and butterflies. It's a great pollinator-friendly plant. Really does bring in a lot of pollinators and has special medicinal properties. Bellwort, love uvularia, a great plant for bringing in those summer or those spring blooms for the early bees. Same with trout lily. Gosh, I love trout lilies. What a cute little plant. Some of these early shade plants are a little bit shorter before the rest of the plants grow up over them, and the bees can take advantage of that. Jacob's ladder, there's another fly pollinating. We love the Jacob's ladder. Very great plant for the shade. I'll use it as a border all along a shade garden. Wonderful plant. Canadian columbine, the hummingbirds and the bees love it. Spreads freely from seed. I love to use columbine in a shade garden. Columbine, Solomon seal, ferns, sedges, allow them all to spread throughout the whole space, take over. And violets, add those into it. So many different kinds of violets. Got to use all the different violets, Minnesota native violets throughout your gardens, your shade gardens. Really great for bees. The bloodroot, so beautiful, spring ephemeral. Really, bloodroot speaks for itself. Such a great plant. Got to use these early spring bloomers. Goat's beard is a summer bloomer for the shade. Aruncus feeds lots of different pollinators. Love the goat's beard, a little bit taller. Wild ramps as a part of my food forest. Absolutely incredible plant. Native onion. Dig up those bulbs. You got to dig that wild ramp. It's so yummy. Very good. Saute it with a little bit of morels in the springtime. Heartleaf foam flower, Tiarella. Love the foam flowers. Tiarellas are great for bringing in bees and butterflies, especially bees and moths in the shade garden in the springtime. Virginia waterleaf. Everybody gets Virginia waterleaf in the garden, and so many folks think it's just a weed. Well, it's an excellent weed. It's edible, it's native, and it feeds the bees. Great plant. Love Virginia waterleaf. Got to let it spread all over the place in the garden. Here's another Virginia bluebells. Oh man, some of the loveliest garden scenes I've ever seen have Virginia bluebells in the springtime blooming all throughout. It'll spread from seed and root throughout the whole garden space and be up during the early part of the spring, feeding bees, being so beautiful to look at. We love Virginia bluebells. Trillium, a couple different kinds here. The grandiflorum, the showiest of the trillium, and the bees just go crazy for it. A forest filled with a ground cover of trillium in the spring. That's a Minnesota scene. It's just so beautiful. We gotta love that. Cohosh or baneberry, Actea is excellent plant. Black cohosh, blue cohosh for feeding the bees. Native plant, medicinal, really good stuff. Spikenard, this is a great plant. I love spikenard. It's very tall, blooms a little bit later than most of the spring bloom or most of the shade blooms, and it's a pronounced plant with quite a structure. I encourage you to look up and utilize American spikenard. Dutchman's breeches, beautiful little bleeding heart, native bleeding heart here, Dicentra,
Who doesn't love a dicentra? Oh gosh, they're so wonderful. Shooting star, got to get some shooting stars in your garden. Cute little spring ephemeral. Wild geraniums, bees go crazy for them. Lots of different great perennial geraniums that the bees love. Whether you go with the maculatum, the native, or a non-native geranium, the wild perennial geranium, the bees go crazy for them. Spiderwort, I love the spreading ability of spiderwort throughout the garden. Tradescantia, what a wonderful plant. Celandine poppy, underutilized, I'd say. It's a great plant. I've seen this one available at Landscape Alternatives and purchased it there a number of times. We do use this for a lot of our gardens because it's kind of a selling point. It's a beauty. It's brings in the bees. Not everybody has them. They're really fun. They work in the shade. They work in the sun. They bloom quite a long time. Mine bloom all the way from spring to summer this year. Wonderful plant. Woodland phlox. Everybody should have woodland phlox. Good spreading native plant for use in the shade. Does so well. Jack in the pulpits. Now, Jack in the pulpits are not a bee plant, but I added them in because we want to point out here that they are pollinated by fungal gnats. So fungal gnats, we might hate gnats, but hey, we love Jack in the pulpits, and the fungal gnats are in there pollinating the Jack in the pulpits. We get some other kind of pollinators in the garden, like beetles will pollinate Canadian ginger. Ants will take the seeds around for Canadian ginger and plant the seeds. The seeds have a fatty deposit on them, and a few plants utilize this strategy of making a fatty deposit on the outside of the seed that the ants will eat, and then they'll take that seed back to their colony. They'll all eat from that fatty deposit, and then when it's time when they eat that fat up, then they discard the seed out onto their dung heap, onto their poop pile, the bathroom, and then that's all fertilizer for that seed. So this is one of the life strategies of Canadian Canadian ginger, is that the ginger will be spread by seed by the ants spreading it around. Again, not pollinated by bees. Beetles will pollinate this one, but and flies, but excellent plant, especially for the shade garden. Now, hostas, everybody's got some hostas at home. Don't go tearing out your hostas to put in native gardens. Add native plants around the hostas. Keep using those hostas. Why? Because the bees know they're there. Bees love hostas. They've been trained to come to your hostas for years. Keep those hostas, allow them to grow. Some folks are way into it and really collect them, and that's excellent. Just again, keep in mind where you're sourcing things, and try to go 95, 98% native plants in your landscape. But those ones that are also serving, the non-native plants like hosta that are serving bees, keep them. Now, hosta, also part of a food forest because it's edible. In the springtime, you can eat the shoots of the hosta as they emerge from the ground. Kind of fun. Lily of the Valley, again, a lot of folks have Lily of the Valley. Love it. It smells so sweet in the spring, and the bees go crazy for it. A few trees and shrubs we're going to say here. So, viburnum, excellent bee-friendly shrub, produces fruits for the birds. Dogwood, same thing, fruits for the birds, pollen and nectar for the bees and other pollinators. Forsythia, everybody loves that very early volley of blooms that we get from Forsythia. Such a wonderful plant. Rose, there's a plant that everybody loves. Roses they smell great, and bees just go crazy for the wild rose. Any rose out there. A lot of roses have been treated with pesticides, especially the roses that you're buying at stores. So if you've got a rose that's been in your landscape for a long time, that's great, keep it. But we don't want to be, we've got to be really careful about sourcing roses because they're often treated. Leatherwood, this is a shrub that I've only seen available at Outback Nursery in Minnesota, and leatherwood is it's really quite rare and hard to cultivate. The bees do enjoy it. It's a bee pollinated plant. It's a shrub that will grow in fairly deep shade, and it's really beautiful. And it's hard to grow once you get a starter plant, it's not hard, but you can't grow them by seed. So it's really hard to cultivate in large numbers, because if you move the seeds, even for a couple hours, if you transport them in a car or something like that for a couple hours, they will die. They will become inviable. And so you can't use those seeds. So Leatherwoods are almost always, when propagated, you got to dig up a baby plant from under the mother plant and pot those up. And that's how I've got my leatherwood, and that's it's a wonderful native plant. Grows, you don't get a lot of native shade shrubs, and this is a good one. Redbud, I love redbud trees. Wonderful short tree, understory tree, feeding the bees. Same with serviceberry, and of course, all the different serviceberries. There's shrub forms, there's tree forms. The tree form, might get 25, 30 feet tall. That's going to be covered in blooms in the spring. Think of these blooming trees as being an amazing pollinator resource, because there's so many blooms that they're able to feed so many different pollinators. And of course, serviceberry, also called Juneberry, is a wonderful edible plant. We can eat those berries. They're delicious. Mountain ash, we don't eat the berries off the mountain ash, but the birds do. Cedar waxwings will come in and eat those mountain ash berries in the fall. Love to see that. And the bees love the blooms in the spring. Again, 30, maybe 35 feet tall, this tree will get eventually. Understory tree, kind of a shorter tree. Chokecherry, I just adore chokecherries. Very strong, strong flavored cherry, very kind of a bitter flavor. I love it. It's an acquired taste, and the bees go crazy for chokecherries. They just are all over it when it's blooming in the spring. A strong, tall shrub that spreads really well. So excellent for a low maintenance space. Bees love raspberries. They absolutely love raspberries. My favorite raspberry is the black cap raspberry. And that one, native plant that has the sweetest, the best tasting raspberry you've ever tasted in your life. And the bees love raspberries at all different stages of development. They will come to the flowers, and then they'll go all over the developing fruit. And I believe they're gathering something from the fruit as it's developing as well. And I'm not sure what, but I always see that. So I'm certain that the bees are gathering. They don't really waste time, those bees. So I'm sure they're gathering something important. Mulberry trees, excellent for a free tree that ends up in almost everybody's landscape. The birds plant them. They make fruit. You can harvest your mulberries or service berries every year by laying a tarp under them when they're ready and shaking the tree, and those berries will fall down to the ground. Gotta love that. It's kind of a smart move, and actually that reminds me, who is smarter than a talking parrot? A spelling bee. Oh, grapes. Okay, grapes, very important for bees. Love the grapes. You can't say enough good about grapes. I mean, wild grape, you can eat the tendrils in addition to eating the grapes. You can eat the leaves and the tendrils. Wonderful plant. The bees go crazy for them. Honeyberry. Everybody should have a honeyberry, period. Just love them. 6 foot tall shrub, get covered in blooms that the bees go nuts for. And then they get these oblong blueberries on them. They're like an oval shaped blueberry. They're just delicious. They're wonderful. I love honeyberries. Everybody should have a honeyberry. Fruit trees of all different sorts, of course, attract so many bees. A tree covered in blooms is just so many flowers. Huge nectar and pollen resources. Apples, cherries, plums, peaches, pears, all your favorite. Peaches, they're still marginal here in Minnesota. Not a lot of folks growing them. There's some folks who've reported some good success, and so more power to them. I haven't planted them yet because maybe in 10 years when things are unfortunately a little bit warmer, then peaches will do better here, and apricots. Let's see, hydrangeas. Again, non-native, but the bees absolutely love them. Flies pollinate hydrangeas, bees pollinate hydrangeas. Everybody loves the hydrangeas. Lilacs too. I hear a lot of folks, oh, I'm tearing down this lilac because I want to put it in a native tree. Well, okay, maybe just put in a native tree somewhere else in the lawn. Keep the lilac because it's feeding the bumblebees. Lilacs, and they smell great too. Excellent pollinator resource. Spirea, again, non-native, but the bees go crazy for them. All the different spirea, wonderful for pollinators. Linden trees, can't say enough good about basswood and other linden trees. Excellent resource for bees. Catalpa trees as well. Big blooms on the catalpa tree. Lovely. Gotta love those catalpa trees. Wind pollinated trees also play a very important role in bees' lives. Wind pollinated trees, bees gather pollen from wind pollinated trees, and they take that pollen back to their hives and they feed it to the larvae. So ash, birch, elm, maple, oak, poplar, willow, very important for bees. Think about that for a second, because the insecticides that we use in ash trees are systemic, and they go through every part of the plant. We use insecticides in ash, we use them in oak, we use them in poplar and willow and maple, all over the place. These are species that bees are gathering pollen from. These insecticides go into the pollen. We're killing bees when we treat ash trees. We have to stop treating the ash trees. We have to remove and replace. Sometimes we replace before we remove. All of the ash trees in Minnesota are going to die. 1 in 10,000 will survive. We do not have that 1 in 10,000 in our lands, in our own personal home landscapes, because that 1 in 10,000 that's going to survive is going to be off in very healthy soil in the woods. These trees, all of the trees in our urban and suburban landscapes, all the ash trees will succumb. They will all die. If we add insecticides until they do, then we're only poisoning all of these insects. 280 native insects utilizing ash trees. All 280 are vulnerable to insecticides when we treat the ash trees with those systemic insecticides. So please don't treat the trees. Trees are a buffet for insects. There's one insect going around killing all the ash trees, and we can't do anything much about it. The best thing we can do is remove and replace. Please don't treat the ash trees anymore. Think about the fact first, also think about, in addition to the insects, think about how pollen from these trees, these are wind pollinated trees. The pollen is microscopic, and every breath of fresh air that we're breathing in the spring, if we're under an ash tree or anywhere near one, we're going to be breathing in neonicotinoid insecticides along with that spring air, and that's not good. So let's think about removal and replacement as the bee-friendly option for dealing with emerald ash borer and any insect problems we have in trees. I skipped over this beautiful picture of the oak. Again, bees love gathering from pollen from wind pollinated trees. Ash, not only do the bees gather pollen from it, but also several different insects. The great ash sphinx moth is one of these. There's 200 of the 280 native insects that utilize ash tree. 204 of them are generalists, and they will find other trees to use if the ash tree is not there. But if the ash tree is there, they're gonna eat from it, and they're gonna die from the insecticides. These are caterpillars and a katydid there, and these are examples of insects that eat off of ash tree. The caterpillars for the ash sphinx moth and other sphinx moths, they curl up in the leaves of ash and make their cocoons in there. And if we treat the ash tree, they're going to die when we do that. So we need to absolutely please stop treating the ash trees. It's creating a massive amount of trouble. Again, I do 300 consults a year. I'm invited to all these properties. The 2 consultations I did just today, both had ash trees, both being treated. The problem is enormous, and the companies that are doing these treatments are making crazy amounts of money, when economically it doesn't make sense for us homeowners to keep treating and paying more to make that tree bigger and make do those payments for the treatments when we're going to have to cut that tree down anyway. It's best to cut the tree down early, use it for firewood, use it for something that you can, whatever you can, compost it if you can, but remove and replace, best option for ash trees. Now let's talk about, again, the deeply interconnected world, and this is Paul Stamets. He's an absolute hero in the world of bees, and he has helped us understand the bear-bee fungi connection. And so we see here a picture of a birch tree that has a bear scratch in it, and the bears have soil all over their claws, and that soil has fungi in it, and they scratch the trees. The fungi starts growing into those scratches, And as the fungi is growing out, the bees come along and they eat from the mycelium, the strands of fungi that we saw earlier that grow through the soil and all around the trees. They eat from that, and that mycelium is medicine for the bees. And so Paul Stamets, this guy, he's designed a bee medicine to help with one of the major issues that honeybees are facing, the varroa mites. And this bee medicine helps improve the bees' own ability to fight off the varroa mites. And so he's got a mushroom inoculant essentially for the bees, a fungal inoculant that's made with mycelium that he grows in his laboratory, and it's showing amazing promise, such that the USDA has enlisted the help of this guy, Paul Stamets, to help make that connection for folks and show the deeply interconnected world that we are here again to savor and cultivate in this deeply interconnected world. And I do this for these guys and for my older son too. These guys, Patrick and William, they just came along, and these are my sons, and we're so proud and filled with joy every single day. These guys are 2 months old, and I want them to grow up in a world that has bees and butterflies. I want them to know the beauty and the bounty, the flavor, the amazing bounty of life on this planet. And so that's why we grow bee lawns. That's why we grow food forests and pollinator pocket gardens and prairie meadows, veggie gardens. That's why we grow it all, so that these boys can have a future. Well, thank you very much. Again, my name is Russ Henry, and I'm the owner of Minnehaha Falls Landscape. It has been an absolute honor and pleasure, and I'd be glad to take any questions if there are any.
We do. We only have time for a couple. But first, I will pass on that we have gotten a few comments of your sons are beautiful and congratulations. So again, congratulations from everyone.
Thank you.
Our first question is one that I personally I've come across it. Sod disposal. A lot of city yard waste or yard compost companies will not take sod. If you're going to put in a bee lawn and you cut your sod off, what the heck do you do with it?
Great question. You can compost it at home. You can make a landscape feature out of it by composting it, turning it over so that it dies, and then piling it all up. Or you can bring it to a privately owned compost facility. So I know that a lot of the public ones won't take it, but places like Kern Landscape Resources or Hiawatha Supply will take your, in Minneapolis and St. Paul, will take your sod and any dirt or debris like that you've got to get rid of. So you can sometimes utilize it, but oftentimes we're pulling it off site, and you're only having to do that with the rapid transition. But that's a piece of the pie that you need to budget some time and energy for.
Are bee lawns salt tolerant?
A little bit more salt tolerant with that white clover and fescue than, say, a Kentucky bluegrass. So they're a great option for the boulevard.
Okay, and our last question for the night is, do bee lawns get moles, voles, and mice like a traditional lawn?
Yes, but you don't see them as much because you've got a little bit more height there to work with that's covering the ground. When you see moles in a standard lawn, you're mowing that lawn 3 inches tall, and it's kind of a uniform substance that you're creating out of that turf. And anything that breaks that uniformity, like a mole or vole hill or tunnel, will really show very heavily. But in a bee lawn, because you got all this texture there already, you're not seeing that. And moles and voles and mice, they're food for owls and hawks and foxes, all of which live in the neighborhood in Minneapolis that I live in, and I've seen in many other neighborhoods throughout the Twin Cities. Coyotes, even all kinds of and neighborhood cats. Everybody, all these wonderful predators eating from moles and voles and mice. And so another great reason to have a bee lawn is to protect rabbits, moles, voles, and mice, so that they can then become food for hawks and eagles and owls and all and foxes and everybody. I hope that helps.
Great. Thank you very much, Russ. And I'm sorry, everyone, but we have very much run out of time for any more questions. So thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar.